Good morning and welcome to this week's recruitment discussion with Jump. And I was going to try sum this sort of week session up. 2025 has been, I think, one of the hardest years in recruitment in recent times. And one of the key issues have been motivating staff to perform. And motivation seems such a simple thing, especially when the market's flying. It's really easy to do. But the art of a true leader is motivating your team when things aren't going to plan. So we've got two webinars over the next 2 weeks that's going to look at motivation and how we put them into place. So next week, we're going to look at the practical side of putting strategically financial incentives in place. But this week, we're going to look at what we class as pure motivators. So this week's session is all about beyond the bonus, unlocking intrinsic motivations for the recruitment team. Dave's back from his travels in Israel. So welcome back, Dave.
Thank you.
And as always, we've got an awful lot to cover. So let's jump straight in with that first question. So the first question, Dave, is what's the biggest single mistake you see recruitment leaders make when they rely solely on financial incentives to motivate their team?
I'm not sure the answer is contained within the question, Howard, that it's those that do rely solely on financial measurements to motivate the team. Because in recruitment, we have so many different roles, but we have more roles than we do ways of motivating people for those roles. So we assume in some cases and in some companies that actually it's about money. It's the money that that matters. It's the financial motivation. And yet a lot of the roles that we have, the people who are occupying those roles aren't necessarily motivated by money. They want to earn. I would assume they want to earn well, but also there's the satisfaction of doing a good job. There's the satisfaction of placing the person, of getting the candidates right, whatever the role is in the company or at the desk. And if we only use a financial measurement or a money reward to motivate, then that's going to turn off as much as it turns on some of the people. We've all I've hired people who are totally money motivated, just want to earn as much as they can in whatever way they can do it. But my experience is that those people are maybe just 5-10% of the people I've ever hired. There's always an element of that, of course there is, but it's not the whole thing. So I think as leaders, we have to look at other ways of motivating people and not just rely on the pay packet, on the commission. And a final thought for me, I am constantly amazed when we ask people, what questions do you have before you join our company? Very few say, can you explain the commission structure and how much I'll earn? It isn't that they don't want to earn well. It's just that it's not top of their priority.
So it's interesting. I think one of the biggest mistakes that recruitment leaders make is thinking that everybody is motivated by money,
Yeah.
which is that intrinsic motivated sort of profit share, bonus, commission, etc. And while they ignore all that intrinsic motivators such as challenge, as you said, personal growth, sense of purpose, the satisfaction of building a strong client or candidate base, pride in their delivery. And I think what you're saying is asking them to do more, but not understanding that motivation only lasts a very short period of time. And that's the thing I always think is that you can give a rousing speech in the morning and then by 11 o'clock, all of that has dissipated away. And because motivation only lasts that short period of time. So you've got to understand what the real drivers are and the real reasons why people are doing that job. And I think that's because we tend to forget about the most powerful motivators. And I think the intrinsic and extrinsic motivators create what we call the dopamine reward, where that person's brains, that dopamine influences the reward and it creates seeking behavior where your brain triggers the response and wants to reinforce that behavior. And so by always looking at both the intrinsic and intrinsic triggers, you can start to look at the levels that you then motivate people with, whether it's the personal trait, whether it's everyone's different, so we have to do different things. But there's no one size fits all. And I think that's the biggest mistake that we tend to make. There is no one size fits all. And what we tend to forget is that to create motivation, we have to create consistency. And to create true motivators, we have to create that dopamine reward inside someone's head to drive them to do those type of things and the things that you need them to do. So moving on then, how do you identify the core values and the personal motivators of individual team members? And does that discover, or what does that discovery process look like in practice?
Yeah, for me, whenever I do something like a values workshop, so this answer could last an hour. It won't. Paul's not with us, and I don't need to compete with Paul. But in short, it's about asking the questions of your team, of your management team, of your leaders. Things like, what behaviors do you reward or do you celebrate in your team? What would make you walk away from a profitable client? And asking those sort of questions, you begin to unearth what it is about the people who are giving you those answers that they value. And you begin to find, if you like, your corporate values. And when you know that, that's when the bit about motivation and that dopamine effect that you've already said, Howard, that's when that comes into play. Because if you're hitting those buttons about what people value, about what motivates them, about what they like about the business, they're going to perform better. Who are your best employees? Why are they your best employees? I was on site a few weeks ago before I went away last week, and there was one star who had done really well at the company I was working with, and then they were interviewing some more people. So I said, well, why don't you do a DNA match? What is it about that one person that makes him so good in terms of performance, in terms of his values, in terms of the way he conducts himself and his attitude, and make that your hiring desires and your questions. And it did change the way they made their next hire, or they are in the process of making their next hire, because you want people who have that integrity, who have that honesty, but who have values either that you as a business owner share, or that you as your business want to reflect to the market. So for me, it's very much about it's about you as a leader and looking at your actions that people can see what your values are, not necessarily your aspirations. Yeah, we want to be the biggest at this, or we want to do 1 million net profit, or we want to open up here. All of those are very good, of course. But actually, what are the actions that you as a leader display? Because that will come down to the values that you exhibit.
It's interesting because I've looked at this question at a slightly different angle. I think that everyone talks about that one big purpose, their big why, that big, as we call it, the big, hairy, audacious goal, etc.
Yeah.
When what I've learned from my personal situations and when I've sort of gone through a really sort of bad sort of time, you need lots of little whys and lots of little goals that help you sort of create that momentum of motivation and drive that. So I think personal motivators are determined by the personal traits of each individual person. And I think these are the four things that I tended to look at when I was managing people. And each person had a different level. So everyone's got probably all four, but everybody's got a different ones that their key one is. And I think the first one is that need for high achievement. And most people are driven by that strong desire to be successful. And we know that. So setting specific goals, KPIs, etc., is critical for them to help them drive that. However, what I found when I started to do that, it was receiving immediate feedback on their performance that
Yeah.
created that consistency and that desire, that dopamine effect in the fire, desire to hit those goals. So it was the job of the manager to understand the components of what they were doing for that role and celebrating all the micro wins, not just the big one at the end. And
Yeah.
that's what we've got to think recruitment. We celebrate that big deal at the end, but all those little micro wins we should be doing from there. You then look at that autonomy or independence. And most really big salespeople and great salespeople like being independent. It's like they're their own business owner in their own business, but they're motivated by that freedom. And I think it's about being a really good manager, knowing how to understand the person, and then knowing when to compliment on things that are going well, when to step in but not take over when things are going poorly, but guide them to help them achieve that achievement. So give them that autonomy, give them that independence. And I think the final one is about empathy, understanding that someone's emotional needs are just as important as someone's, sales needs and money needs. And this allows the manager to and the employee to build trust. Once you start to understand their emotion and empathize with people, you build trust, and then you can tailor your approach effectively, and that contributes to their performance, but more importantly, contributes to their job satisfaction. And where people are more satisfied in their job, they tend to perform better. And so I think it's those sort of things that you start to look at when you uh, drive people and push people forward. You've got to look at those three things or four things and drive those things into your management traits to help you grow your team. I don't think it's just that simple. Okay, so when a consultant, I hear this all the time, and we've heard this quite a few times in that recently, Dave, and I know we have. When you hear a consultant tell you, "I'm just here for the money," how do you uncover the deep motivators that are actually sustaining their performance long term?
I think it's about sitting down with that person and asking them lots of questions. What do you mean by the money? Do you mean basic salary plus commission? Do you mean percentage that you take home on the deal? Is it all about the money at the end of the day, how much you're earning? Because I would suggest that more than half the people that work for our companies, whether you've got 10 people, that could be five. If you've got 100, that could be 50, wouldn't answer the question, I'm only here for the money. There'd be something else. And our job as leaders is to find out what that something else is and use that as the motivating factor. Because some are here, like I said in the first question now, some we know are just there for the money. But in tough times, some people don't earn quite as much money. So what are they going to do? Are they going to leave? Or if they're managed well and they're looked after well, and the other motivators, the other things that they value in life, if they are still being looked after, then they can still carry on and earn good money. Most people in recruitment, especially the young ones, say under 30, earn more than a lot of their friends who are 30. They may be nurses, they may be teachers, they may be whatever it is, whatever the circle of friends that our colleagues who work for us have. If you're doing quite well in recruitment, you're earning quite well. So you do want to keep that going, but at the same time, that isn't going to get you up in the morning. Not for most people.
I love this part as a manager because I think this is what is all management is all about. And I think a lot of people use that "I'm just here for the money" as a deflection because they don't really
Yeah, yeah.
understand what their motivators are. And therefore it's our job as a manager to, I think, to build trust and personal rapport to start with, to help the consultant or the person to actually offload what they actually need, and then we can try shape from there. So I think uncovering that intrinsic motivators, you need to be able to make the recruiter feel comfortable enough to share those personal aspirations and then go beyond commission. And often we try and ask that question right at the start. You're talking about asking it in the interview. Yes, we should ask it in the interview. But when someone comes through the door, we should start that slow to get to trust. They trust us, build that rapport. And then sometimes their motivators will start to come out and you'll start to build those motivators. So I think I used to do this all the time. I used to host regular one-to-ones where the one-to-one wasn't about the sale, but often that one-to-one wasn't planned. That one-to-one was planned secretly by me, but not by the other person. And that meant sort of either catching when they're going to lunch, walking out to lunch with them, having conversations on sort of nights out and work nights out and things like that. And it was generally getting them to open up and ask about their family, their hobbies, their interests outside of work, because it demonstrated that you care, and that built loyalty. And that meant that I could start to dig a little bit deeper into what actually truly motivates them. I always think what you always said about empathy. I said that being an empathetic listener also helps. You know, I I do this now with my clients. I share stories about myself and personal things about myself that I've gone through that matches to what they're. So it's an experience in matching. And I found that again, it creates that an authentic environment where people feel like they trust you because they feel like you're in the same boat. And then I think the other thing that we tend to do, but not do very well, is ask them for their input. You know, I often inquired about what would make their job easier or more enjoyable, whether that be better leads, better process, different process. And if I gave them a voice and a sense of ownership, and if I could change those things, then I would. But if I couldn't change them, then I'd give the reasons why and be honest about those things, so people didn't get thinking I was just going to take that idea away and try to do something with it. But I was very honest about what I could change and what I couldn't change and what we could do. And I would always say, from those type of conversations, some of the best ideas that I had for the business came from those people. And I always made a point of going back and telling those people it was their idea. It came
Yes.
from this
Yeah.
person. And I
Yeah.
let them take the plaudits, the public plaudits for
Yeah.
that, because it's those people who created the opportunity. And it's those type of things that I always thought, as a manager, help accelerate and make my business run smoothly. It was the oil that made my business engine run and work from that. And so it works, but you've got to be really, really functional with it. And it hasn't to be prescriptive. And that's what I meant. So I never had those as set meetings. They were always that, to me, it was something I needed to go and do with someone. So I'd plan it, and then I'd catch someone unawares and have that conversation unawares. And sometimes that would create so much more information for me.
Yeah.
This is the question that we come across all the time. And this is the question that I'm really intrigued by your answer. I know how I'm going to answer, but I'm intrigued by your answer on here. What role does a compelling mission statement and values play in the daily performance? And how do you make it more than just words on a wall? Because we see that all the way, everywhere we go.
Well, I'm smiling at this. You know what? I don't see words on a wall everywhere I go. So even if words on a wall they're just that, yeah. A lot of the companies that I walk into, not necessarily I'm working with, but companies that say, can you come in and talk to us? You go in, and actually there isn't any sense of values and mission and whatever it may be, mission, vision. There may be as you walk into reception, but then you go onto the sales floor and it's either leaderboards or it's on the desktop or the laptop with charts of success and a leaderboard of top 10. But actually, the living, breathing bit about what is the mission of this company, I don't think that gets displayed very much at all. And I used to do this thing when I always used to ask the receptionist in the days before everybody was in what seemed to be like a WeWork, where the receptionist would be a reception for 20 different companies. Tell me what this company stands for, and they wouldn't know. But I think it's absolutely critical. And sometimes these things get a little bit knocked aside. Oh, don't worry about that. We're just here to make some money, or you're here to make money. But actually, what you're about as a company, your purpose, your vision, I think really does matter. Really does matter. So I see a lot companies, and they will have things like one of our values is integrity. Yeah, I don't think there's probably a recruitment company out there that wouldn't say its value is integrity. But then you're no different to anybody else. What does that really mean? So I've seen that written in a different way. For example, transparency, even when it stings. That's a value. Now that's a value that really resonates with me because what you're saying is obviously you're a company with integrity, but you're honest even when it hurts, even when it's difficult. So you know that if you come to me as a consultant or to my company, we're going to be honest with you. And it's important that as a leader, and of course as your consultants, that they know what the company stands for, because that is unique to your company. No company can have the same mission in the same way. So that is something that is unique to your company and it should be celebrated. And I do think it's absolutely critical. And if you have performance measurements, if you have reviews, if you have one-to-ones with managers, you should use your company's mission statement as a barometer, and your individual people should know where they fit into that mission statement because that cements loyalty, that cements the way that they engage with you.
It's interesting. So I agree with absolutely everything that you said there. And I'm going to take it back a level further. Okay. I think it starts with recruiting the right person based on the behaviors and the values and the mission of the
Yeah,
business.
yeah,
And that's the will to do the job, the behaviors to do the job, and then the skills to do the jobs. And I think this is the major issue in recruitment. We have little alignment between the values and behaviors and the company goals. Hence, people tend to then feel detached from that business, and it's just like they're on their own little sort of island, okay, and we shouldn't be on that. And I think the company mission and values provide a sense of purpose that motivates people, and that's by giving them a deeper meaning beyond just earning money. And I think we've got
Yeah.
to sort of get that. And so if you're going to go to your local marketing department, etc., your marketing people, and they're just going to write something for you that isn't your values, then that's just a waste of time. And I think by understanding the company purpose and believing in the purpose, then for most recruiters, that's having a positive impact, I think, on candidates and clients and their own lives. Then you can start to think about how you can engage and align those with the company goals and then intrinsically drive people to success. And I think we tend to miss those type of things. And I think, however, if your mission statement is something that, and let's look at this, where do we get our motivation from and where do we get our values and behaviors from? That's generally from the management team. So if the management team doesn't believe, or at worst doesn't display those values and behaviors, then you've got another major issue. And I think, again, we need to push for better performance. And when we try and push for better performance from our managers, but if we're not following our own value statement, our own mission statement, then it just falls on deaf ears and it becomes a demotivator. So I think we've got to make sure that those alignments happen. And I think if you think meaningful workplaces is meaningful work and praising it to connect to the values creates a deeper connection, I think, when it comes to the level of satisfaction of a job well done. And it's recording those things. And if we start to think about the average fill rate in the UK is 19%, that means
Yeah.
81% of the job is, according to success of a KPI board, is failure. When actually part of that 81% could be a job of really, really well done. It's just been unrewarded by cash. But we can intrinsically award people, for a job well done. But you've just missed out on that candidate. You've just missed out on this, etc. But we've done a really good job. It just hasn't led to where we want the money piece. And I think that's the bit we tend to do. We praise that 19%. We don't do anything to praise that 81%. And it's what can we find in that 81% that is probably more part of most people's recruitment jobs that would then start to motivate people. And it's going back to look at the little things rather than looking at the end purpose. And I think we tend to forget that constantly. And as I said, if our management team isn't in line with the purposes that you've outlined, then that is the major issue that most people have.
And I'll give you a good example of that from Monday. Had on site with a client and a candidate that they had put forward for an interview didn't get the job. But the candidate was so impressed with how the consultant had dealt with him. 18 months later, which was actually while I was away, that candidate was now a client and phoned a consultant at the company I'm working with and said, 18 months ago, you treated me so well. I'm now looking for people. And I thought I'd come to you. And I've gone to the agency that placed me, but I've come back to you because you did a really good job. Now I said, that is a story in itself. That's a case study. Because that's a case study of honesty. It's a case study of, of loyalty and treating the candidate well, and we'll come back. Now, hopefully they'll make some placements from that. But even if they don't, that's a really good story for 18 months down the line, because we've said this so many times. We have said it so many times. People don't always remember what you say, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. And our job in an AI world is to make people feel like you're competent, you're loyal, you're trustworthy, you have that transparency, because that's the art of being a really good recruiter.
I think it's interesting, isn't it, when you think about that 18 months that person has sat on that
Yeah,
piece of information.
yeah. And
And you
it's stuck
start,
in the back of their head
yeah,
for 18 months somewhere.
yeah, and you start to think about, start to think about testimonials and things like that. People give testimonials for two reasons: you've given outstanding service or you've given poor service.
Yes.
Anything in the middle, there's very little written about. And if you go look on any sort of trust pilots, Google reviews, loads of 5 stars, quite a few 1 stars, very
And
few
not many
two,
two
three, and
or
four.
three stars.
Yeah,
No, no.
okay, because people aren't bothered. So people only give that. So if that person has come back with that passion, and that passion is still burnt for 18 months, that says something about A, the consultant, and B, about the business services that they provide. And that's the bit, and that's, we should be celebrating that, we should be motivating on that. And that to me is one of the things that we tend to miss when that 81% is put in front of us. But what good things do we do in that 81% that could really be harvested and turned into a profitable piece of business, even though it's 18 months later? And we
Yeah.
tend to forget that because we tend to be so focused on the end figure rather than the actual production of that end figure.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
So let's push that a little differently then. How do you create a sense of purpose and meaning in an industry that is often transactional by nature then?
I think for purpose, it's either something that has emanated from the top. If you're the founder of a business, you have a real crystal clear focus on what you want as the purpose of your business. And you may have started it and then you've hired a second or a third or a fifth or a 10th person, but it's still about your purpose and that becomes the business purpose. If as a business you're on a journey and you've hired more people, is that purpose still relevant? Does it still resonate with the teams? If it doesn't, that's when you get your teams involved and you do something like a values or a purpose workshop. Because if you do that, you'll often see problems and patterns from your team that you don't see yourself. So getting them involved brings that sense of collaboration. It brings that sense of actually we are all in this together. That's a very old and hackneyed phrase, but actually in a time when you want to motivate your team, if they feel that they're contributing to the wider picture, and that could include actually what's the purpose of this business, then you're going to get better performance on them. You're going to understand a little bit more about them. And sometimes getting external people in to come and do a purpose workshop or a purpose session is a really good way of unearthing things that you didn't know were there in the first place. I'm not suggesting if you've been running your company, you change your purpose, but I am suggesting that sometimes what started off in a different world may not work now. Got one company that I did some work for, just wanted to be known as the best tech recruiter in London. Well, now, what is a tech recruiter? Is that digital? Is that AI? Is that infrastructure? Is that software development? There's so much in tech that it needed a slightly stronger sense of identity and purpose. And actually, did it involve placing people? Because I couldn't see that from their purpose. So I think it's something that if I were looking at it today, I'd be looking to involve my teams to either sanity check where I am or to get some new fresh thoughts.
So I think that phrase sense of purpose, and again, when we talked, I'm going to talk about some of the companies that I've talked to this year who aren't clients, who are having a hard time and struggling this year.
Yeah.
And one of the questions I asked them is, what are you focusing on? And the answer is all the time, I'm focusing on the money. I'm focusing on the end product. I'm focusing on this, that, and the other. And I've always asked, okay, and what focus have you got on your staff? And you get this very sort of, I'm just trying to drive them harder. I'm trying to make them make more money, etc., etc. If they're not succeeding, I'm going to get rid of them, or and these type of things. And so then start to ask them about the non-monetary rewards that you offer your staff that creates opportunities for your staff, because then that's about the sense of purpose you're trying to do. So, you know, you can look at introducing sort of loads of non-monetary incentives, and that pays attention to which ones resonate, or if you pay attention to them, it shows you which ones resonate with the individuals and which ones will bring you the most money in. And I think we tend to forget that when it's a hard time. And you think about, we talked about, public recognition quite a lot, praising in public or praising in team meetings
Yeah.
or company letters or on social media, etc. How many posts are you now seeing going out on social media about this person's done this well, etc., etc. And many people are sort of motivated by their peer recognition and status. However, we've got to start to think sometimes some people, I mean, I was never motivated by that because it sort of made me cringe a little bit. But deep down inside, I knew that if that was going out, I'd done a really good job, and it made me feel like that. So sometimes when I was doing that public recognition, and I knew that person was that way inclined, I would go warn them. If I knew the person would be getting absolutely overexcited by that, I'd never tell them, because I want to see that raw emotion in the business. So I'd
Yeah.
always make sure I'd plan for the right people. The other thing that I think we tend to forget when the times are hard is all about providing professional development opportunities. And I think offering advanced training, workshops, and mentoring, etc., is really important. And sometimes I was delivering all of that, but they weren't part of the company training. They were things I'd picked up for individuals. There were things I'd picked up for teams, and I started to put those in because I thought it would benefit the team and benefit the person. It showed that I cared about them. But actually, my driver was it would benefit me, because if I could make them better at their job, they would stay longer and perform better.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
right.
constantly I drove on that. The other thing that I found that I think a lot of leaders stand alone and they feel very lonely at the top, but we very seldom do delegate responsibilities. And we go back to that comment about autonomy. Okay. So I think giving certain people ownership of certain challenges and asking them to step up often leads to people taking ownership and developing it. And it's like having that, you've got your manager and you've got your captain on the football team, but it's then who the other people that are driving the other people, when the captain's hard at work or when the manager's at hard at work. And it's having those secondary people. So I think sometimes delegating responsibility shows that you trust them, and it shows that you can grow their capabilities. And that trust and independence is a significant driver for a lot of people, that you trust me, you independently allow me to do these type of things, and you allow them to fail and don't chastise them for fail. And I think the other side is that we tend to forget how to interject healthy competition or gamify things. Top salespeople are often naturally very competitive, as we know. And I think introducing friendly competition, some of the best competitions. Again, I was talking to this yesterday with somebody yesterday about this, were non-cash rewards. It was like winner of the week, early dart finishes, late starts, etc. But it drove the sense of winning other than
Yeah.
the cash. And people were competing for those things. And we changed those things every week, what the criteria was. And we could change them and focus them on what would actually lead to the thing that we wanted. And it was a change in behaviors and a change of attitudes. And I think for sense of purpose, it's about, we tend to think recruitment is an individual team sport. Individually, you've all got your targets to hit and trying to hit those targets individually. But actually, from a company, it's the collective.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so to get them together as a collective is far more important than it is to get them performing as an individual. What's that silly comment, isn't it? Is it, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go as a team.
Yeah.
But you've
And
got to make.
along the way, and in recruitment, everybody should share what their targets and motivations are. So we're assuming, I'm not necessarily you and me now, but we're assuming this only applies to salespeople. But what about a finance team? Maybe they've got a target to get their DSO down from 39 to 37. Well, let's celebrate that and let's share it. Marketing, it could be we want to see our business in 5 different online publications. Whatever it could be, everybody in each role has got some form of target. The more we know what they're aiming for and the more we celebrate it, then one of our values is we celebrate success for everyone. And often I go into recruitment companies, and the front office, if you like, the salespeople are really good at what they do and they like what they do, but they don't really understand what the back office does. But as owners, we know that it's a requirement through the cash. When you've got the cash in the bank, that's the ultimate success. Well, that back bit is done by people who we used to call back office and front office, but actually they're all part of the sales process.
So let's move that on then. How do you then help recruiters connect their daily activities to personal growth and career development in a way that drives immediate results? Because we said that motivation lasts for a very short period of time, and then it's all about the purpose that then keeps people engaged. How do we do that?
And simply, for me, when I've been working with recruiters when I was running a business, and now when I'm helping other businesses to scale, a lot of it is about writing it down. It's about the physical act of either writing on a piece of paper, on a note screen, on your phone, or on your desktop, putting it into your CRM. What is it that you're doing today that aligns to the purpose of the business and what you're trying to do for your clients? And then consistently looking at that and saying, well, where do we need to tweak that? Where was success? When it didn't work quite the way you wanted it to do, why was that? And enabling that in a conversation. It's very different to have a conversation when you say to somebody, how's your day gone? In line with what we're trying to do as a business. That's a very different question than, did you hit your numbers today? Did you get your CVs out today? Did you hit your KPIs today? We would all recognize how important those things are. But if you're going to understand the motivation of an individual, you need to understand it in the bigger picture. And if you're having a 5-minute catch up at the end of the day, they're the sort of things you should ask for.
So I think what you're saying is setting clear, achievable goals. So, I mean, almost a SMART framework, so to speak, which is very old sort of language from there. But I think that helped to set the expectations and track their progress, and that builds confidence. And you can look at that. I think another one is about that personalized rewards. Every salesperson is different, and therefore offering a variety of financial, but offering a lot more non-financial incentives that cater for the individual purpose and the individual driver of that person starts to help. You then start to look at that. I know through our management training, we do quite a lot of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and things like that.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
start to think fostering that psychological safety, an environment where employees feel safe to risk and admit mistakes without fear of punishment is really important. And I know lots of companies where I went into, well, one of the businesses I was with, I took over an office and there were drag marks all the way to the front door. And I said, what are those drag marks to the front door? And he said, oh, it's the boss. The manager of the office who's now gone. When you were failing, he would drag your table and your chair further and further to the door. And his comment was, as soon as your chair's outside the door, you know you're not coming in anywhere anymore. And there was loads of drag marks. And it was just horrific. So you start to think, can people make a mistake without that fear of punishment and that encourage collaboration and innovation? And I think we talked about that continuous learning already, and investing in ongoing training and professional development gives people. But I think the biggest thing is building trust and that office of recognition. Simple acts of. I'll give you some examples that I learned very quickly, enabled me to get deeper into people's psyche. When you walk into an office, just saying hello to people. Making sure you say hello rather than walking in quietly, sitting down and not saying hello to anybody, saying hello to people, especially if you're in a position of authority. The other thing that I found that really worked really well was when someone asked you, have you had a good night or had you had a good weekend, etc., is rather than just saying, yes, I did, yes, and then explaining what you did and sort of talking about what you've done, and then asking the person, what did you do at the weekend? How did you enjoy that? How did you enjoy that? And it was that transparent communication and that open communication that started to make people feel more part of the team, because you were talking about what you were doing, you were talking about what you're doing, and then they'd be more trusted to give you feedback on what's actually happening when you're trying to promote things. So I think talking about that and getting the trust between the management and the sales team is really important. And that trust is only broken, or that trust breaks down, is when you're not communicating with each other. So I think the trust is all about communication and what's going on and how that works. So the final question, I think this is quite an interesting question as well. When I wrote this, I was thinking of different ways to sort of bring this to the table, and I thought I'll give it straight as it is. What's your framework for diagnosing when underperformance is actually a motivation issue versus a skill or accountability issue?
And for me, that's about taking the time with the consultant to find out what's going on underneath the surface. So you use the word in the question about diagnosing. If you go to a doctor, she or he will spend quite a bit of time trying to find out what's going on. Why does your leg move this way and not that way? What was it like yesterday? You're trying to diagnose what the problem is. Often as leaders, sometimes we've got one-to-ones and we're just trying to find out, hit your numbers, hit your numbers, hit your numbers, and it's all relevant to the numbers. But diagnostics can be, actually, is there something going on elsewhere? Either is there something going on in this floor? Is there something going on at home? Is there something that you're worried about? Is there something that you had thought you would do that you haven't done? And the more intelligent questions you can ask, the more you unearth, actually, yeah, this issue that this consultant or maybe marketing or finance or whatever it may be, is because of something else that either they don't want to bring to the table because they don't feel comfortable or they don't feel they can trust you with it, or it's having a material effect on because it's affecting how they're thinking because in their quiet times, if there are any in recruitment, they're thinking about this other issue. So I think that that word diagnostic or diagnosis is really important. As leaders, one of our jobs is to really get under the skin of what's going on with our people. And that sometimes takes time. And sometimes we'll have things that will say, right, we're going to have a one-to-one with Jenny, got half an hour planned. But after 25 minutes, as a leader, you can test that you haven't really uncovered, you haven't got beneath the surface of what's going on with Jenny. Now, that may not take place in that meeting, but what may be the nice thing to do is just actually, can we have a cup of coffee maybe tomorrow and we'll talk about something else? Because that's really important. It's important to diagnose what is motivation and what is the salespeople will say the market's bad, so I'm not doing very well. Well, there's something behind that. And our job as leaders is to get behind that and find out what it is.
So when you think about what you've just said there, I think often people focus solely on the money, and
Yep.
managers who focus solely on results because they think that's the mean to the end. When actually it's not, is it? Because if you're only focusing on the results and not focusing on what produces those results, then there's a problem. And we know we say, well, we focus on producing the results because we focus on the KPIs. But I use a second KPI. I use three KPIs. I use the key performance indicator and I use key persons of influence. But the one I'm going to talk about now is, your kept promise index. So if you're keeping promises to your consultants and how you work with your consultants and promises to your clients and your candidates, it works. Okay, but it's about helping them connect their sales success to their deeper personal goals. So if you've actually taken the time to understand what their deeper personal goals are, but you haven't connected them back to their sales success, then you haven't really listened to them. You haven't really listened to their deeper purpose. And so you're not really connecting those two things together. So I think if you link your personal goals to your sales goals and your aspirations, so asking questions like, you were talking about asking questions. I always ask the question, what would you do if you started to earn twice as much commission? What would you do with the money? And you get different answers. Now you can start to work on them. What you're working towards in your personal life. All these sort of things, whether it be a dream holiday, paying a holiday. I know what I was like when I first went into recruitment. I wanted to get independent of my parents, and I worked really hard to get a deposit on my flat and move out, and I did really quickly. But then my aspirations changed. I think that's the bit that we talk to consultants, that first interview when we first bring them into the thing, what motivates you? Money. What really motivates you? Oh, this. We get that offhand answer rather than really digging deep. But once they've achieved that, then what takes that place? So once I'd achieved my flat, what was coming next? What was coming next? What was coming next? So your aspirations change. Those little whys change all the time. And I think we tend to forget that. And I think using collaborative goal setting instead of just aligning it to our target. So what's the company goal? What's the
Yep.
office goal? What's the individual goal? Assigning them all together, then that means that people see their place in success. So yes, I might not have hit target, but I enabled the company to hit its target and I've enabled the office to hit its target. So challenging people to set their personal goals and aligning them with the company objective, that's really important. I think most people tend to pursue goals and then we tend not to help create the link between those goals and the objectives. And I think one
Yep.
of the biggest things that I found that really helps people was involving them in customer feedback loops. You talked earlier about, that person's done that and he's come back after 18 months. I think recruiters often find the purpose in helping others succeed. Their
Yeah.
candidates succeed and their clients succeed. So sharing positive feedback is really strong. And I think having that sense of purpose of providing a truly valued service that you're part of and encouraging them to deliver that service. And if that gets unsolicited feedback, we should be celebrating that unsolicited feedback. We should celebrate all of those things, those rewards, okay, as much as we do it, okay. And I think, well, Blur said it, didn't it? It gives you an enormous sense of well-being, park life. Everyone's going to be singing that now for
Yeah.
the rest of the day.
Always good to quote a good Essex band.
Yeah, when you achieve something. But achieving something might not be that financial end goal. That 18-month period of that person then coming back, that must have given that consultant and the business owner of that business an enormous sense of well-being because of what's happened.
Yeah.
But are we looking for that and celebrating that? So your word diagnostic, is great about underperformance, but people might be underperforming, but might be just millimeters away from performing. But because we're not helping them and providing with that sense of well-being, then they'll carry on underperforming because they don't know how close to performance they truly are.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think there's so much there that we can look at and so much there that we can think about. So next week, we're going to move into strategic incentives. So engineering high performance through smart compensation design. But what we're going to start to do is link that back to what we've talked about this week and how we can use both of them to really drive a business forward and drive individuals forward. So, Dave, I think there's been loads in there that people can take away. So for those that have been on, great. If you want to tell others about it so they can watch it on YouTube or watch it on our website from there, feel free to. If you want to pass it down to your teams, pass it down to your teams for those who have teams, but then come back next week, because I think next week when we link those two things together, it will start to show how people can truly drive a business forward and how to motivate people in 2026 rather than just work harder, or the worst one, just work smarter, which never works at all. Dave, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for your time, and we'll see you all next week. By the way, it's snowing in Leeds, so hope you're safe where you all are. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Have a good week, everybody.